Hey, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming and joining us on a Thursday evening. And we know it's so busy. Um, just checking to see if Hayden has arrived. Hayden, you're here. We'll let Hayden take it away.
All right, awesome. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Hayden. I use he, him, his pronouns, and welcome to the Building a Reparative Future event, where the Sustainability Office and the People of Color Sustainability Collective are collaborating along with the Fixit Clinic to bring to you this wonderful Q&A event. And yeah, do you want to go ahead and move to the next slide? All right, awesome. So I did a little bit of introduction of myself. I'm going to go ahead and let the other student interns do their introductions.
Thank you. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as well and tell us where you're zooming in from. And feel free to answer to the question, what is something you or someone you know had that broke? And did you buy a new one to replace it? Did you throw it away or fix it? And so my name is Azarelli, and I am a first year majoring in environmental science, and I am an intern at the People of Color Sustainability Collective. On this slide here are our other interns, Chris Lang, Valeria, and Josie. Next slide, please. And then, so for our mission, PoCSC is an initiative and collaboration between the Ethnic Resource Centers, colleges 9 and 10, and the Sustainability Office. Within the mission of PoCSC, we aim to make UCSC a leader not just in mainstream sustainability, but also a leader in environmental justice, since we recognize our changing demographics and pressing ecological challenges. We aim to accomplish this by incorporating the aspects of research, outreach, and culture, making it known that people of color make a huge contribution to the sustainability movement and should be at the forefront of the movement. We are a space that reexamines the definition and values the sustainability movement to identify how it can be more inclusive of all underrepresented populations. We ultimately aim to create a critical dialogue about environmental justice through student discussion spaces, social media awareness campaigns, and speaker presentations.
Hi everyone, my name is Josie and I'm an intern at PoCSC. Thank you all for being here today. This evening's event was made possible through the co-funding initiative offered by the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Because we know it's getting late on a busy workday, we wanted to let you guys know about a few upcoming events before people sign off. On Monday, May 17th, we'll be hosting an agriculture and environmental justice panel with the Salinas Valley youth and farmers, a collaborative event with the Leaders for Earth team from 6 to 8 p.m. Later next week, we'll also be hosting a two-part event with Crystal Ocean Ambrose about plastic pollution, youth leadership, and environmental justice on Thursday, May 20th. And lastly, tomorrow, May 14th, the American Indian Resource Center and the Asian American and Pacific Islander Resource Center co-host an event titled Micronesian Traditional Navigation from 4 to 5:30 p.m. Additionally, the American Indian Resource Center will also be hosting an American Indian end of the year celebration on June 10th from 4 to 5:30 p.m. And we are posting the links for these respective events in the chat below. Feel free to register. And with that being said, I'll pass it on to Chris, who will be introducing Peter Mui.
Thank you, Josie. So hey there, everybody. My name is Chris Lang, and I'm a grad student intern for the People of Color Sustainability Collective. And I'm also a grad student in the Environmental Studies Department. And I use he, him pronouns. So I'm going to introduce the illustrious Peter Mui now, who is the founder of the Fixit Clinic. And so, real quick, Fixit hosts community repair events around the US and now globally via Zoom. Since its initiation, over 550 Fixit Clinic events have been hosted at elementary, secondary, and high schools, even colleges and universities. And where I found the Fixit Clinic was at a local library in Redwood City. and also through teleconferencing software, particularly here with the event of COVID. So here are a few words that Peter uses to describe the Fixit experience: education, entertainment, empowerment, elucidation, and ultimately enlightening through all ages, doing it together, hands-on, fix and learn, community-sponsored and community-led discovery, disassembly, troubleshooting, and repair. And we're just super excited to have this collaboration today. As students of sustainability from diverse backgrounds, we recognize that people of color bear the disproportionate burden of mass consumption within the United States and abroad, across the supply chain from raw material extraction to production to consumption and ultimately in disposal. Furthermore, people of color make a majority of essential worker jobs, such as stocking and inventory, like we might see through Amazon distribution hubs that are foundational to the consumer gig economy. So we hope that this conversation with Peter can help plant seeds on UCSC campus to provide students with practical skills to fix broken items that would otherwise be destined for the landfill. So just for today, you can expect on the agenda a presentation from Peter, who will share some words, and that'll be followed by a lively discussion that we will kind of co-moderate, but really, given this is a pretty intimate space with not as many of us, I think this is something we can open up, and we hope each of you can contribute as well to think about these various topics related to mass consumption, disposable culture, and UCSC campus sustainability, diversity and repair, et cetera, et cetera. So without further ado, Peter, we'd like to invite you to share what you've prepared for us. We're super excited. So let me stop sharing my screen.
Okay, guys. Well, I look at who's here, and I see that Timony's here from EPA District 9, and Tim Bratton is here from Gray Bears. So, and it's not a big crowd. So I know it's always dangerous to do this, but I think I'll be much more informal, and I'll switch this on the fly. I mean, I'll give my presentation, but it's nice to sort of see the friendly faces. I just want to make a shout out to you guys. All right, so let me start sharing the screen. Okay, start, go. So I always open by acknowledging the global fixers, the volunteers who make this repair work possible. And now, it was originally in person, but now it's on the Global Fixers server on Discord and via Zoom. And I also want to acknowledge the Joint Powers Authorities that have believed in and supported the mission. And that said, the mission is always changing. We've constantly tweaking what we're doing, and presenting to you guys and trying to expand down at UC Santa Cruz is also part of expanding the mission and trying to do different stuff all the time. I mean, this is a grand experiment. So I'm, in the spirit of thinking globally and acting locally, I'd like for you guys to think about how we might deploy some of these programs around UCSC so that they might spread through the Central California coast or through the SF Bay Area or through Northern California and beyond. So we're in these UC campuses already, and we're doing different stuff there. And I'm great that I really appreciate that UCSC and the People of Color Sustainability Collective asked me to provide this talk, because I want you to think about what sort of innovative program we can do at UC Santa Cruz that's unique from what they're doing at the other campuses. So, at the same time, while I want you to think big, I want you to think about doing something doable, something modest that we can learn from and scale up. So as I go through my presentation, think about what we could do on campus to move these issues forward just a little bit. And in case you want to, and you like this, there's a Fixit Clinic on Saturday that you can attend, or you can always join the Global Fixer server on Discord. That's running all the time. Okay, so we've had this wonderful run with technology, and we love all the doohickeys and gadgets that have come from it. We love our space heaters that rotate and have remote controls. We love our toothbrushes with timers. The latest toothbrush apparently has a Bluetooth connection, so it connects to your phone. I'm not sure what that does. But what do we do when this stuff breaks? And I want you to keep that image on the right-hand side of the busted iron in mind for other things we're going to talk about later, because think about all the engineering and all the tight integration that went into creating this thing. And now when it's at end of life, you have to try and move the constituent parts back to places where they can be reused again effectively. And if you think about all the embodied energy involved in creating this device, and looking at what it's like when you disassemble it, to try and demanufacture this and send the constituent parts off to the appropriate streams where they could be reassembled into something useful. Think about all the energy and time and cost and expense it would be involved in doing that. So that's just like a little aside for the moment. Just imagine that, okay? There's also times when you can't replace an item because they don't make it anymore. Like on the left-hand side, that Hamilton Beach milkshake mixer. Or on the right-hand side, the toy industry is like the fashion industry these days. So they make a toy for about 3 months or 6 months or whatever, and then it's not available anymore. So for this little girl with her Princess walkie-talkies, somehow I don't think a pair of Spider-Man walkie-talkies is going to cut it as a replacement. Well, that's the spirit with which we started holding Fixit clinics. And the first one was actually held at the UC Berkeley Graduate Student Housing. And what we're really trying to do here is we're trying to use people's broken items as the entree into having them apply critical thinking and troubleshooting skills to all sorts of things in their life beyond the broken item that's in front of them. We're trying to generalize these skills, and we were never about sort of giving people free repair. We always wanted to have people materially participate in their own repair because we wanted them to be part of that process. We're always about teaching people how to fish as opposed to handing them a fish. So we put the tools out and we have them go at it. And yeah, we coach them. And sometimes, yes, people are all thumbs, and we're not. Of course, we'll help somebody if they really can't do it. But it's really about trying to encourage people to do this stuff on their own. And it's all ages, all experience levels, non-denominational. We love it when fixing families show up. All hands on deck for these sorts of events. So, is there an age limit, a lower age limit for repair? I mean, here are these kids handling this electrical, looks like a toaster in this particular picture. Well, these are high schoolers. These high schoolers have fixed this computer monitor. This is a 7th grader, and he's fixing smartphones. These are 6th graders. We taught them how to repair the 3D printers in their classroom. But as we moved to shelter at home, they had all this distance learning technology. I'm totally comfortable that these kids could repair their own laptops and their classmates' laptops. I mean, depending on what's wrong with it, of course, but they have the facility. It's possible to do it. Now, let's look at a fairly common item which we all own, a smartphone. You would think it would be pedestrian to be able to remove the battery. The battery is something and replace the battery. The battery is one of the common things, probably the #1 thing that goes wrong with smartphones. And it should be as simple as changing the batteries in a flashlight. Just take out a couple batteries, swap it in, you're done. However, the manufacturers have made it difficult to do this. So in this particular case, one large smartphone manufacturer, who shall remain nameless, designed a special screw just for the case. So it's called a pentalobe screw. It's proprietary to their devices. They're the only devices on the market that use it. And once you're inside, they use standard Phillips head screws. I put the two above each other for comparison. But why would they put these screws on the outside if for no other reason than to just be able to make it hard for you to get inside at all? I encountered something similar with something more common. So this is an air purifier. And you remember last year we were having all those wildfires in Northern California. And so I went to clean it out, which would be a normal thing that you would expect to be able to do with an air purifier. So there are 6 screws holding the 2 halves of the case together. And I'm like, I can't get the thing open. And lo and behold, it turns out that these deeply recessed screws, 2 of them, the top 2 on the far right in the picture, upper right, they're security torque screws. Now, everything else about these 6 screws is the same. They're the same pitch, they're the same length. They could go in the place where the other ones was. The only reason I can figure out that they did this was to frustrate somebody from being able to open it up. So at our in-person events, we would have these kinds of toolkits available so that people could open up, have all the different types of bits they might need to possibly open up consumer devices. And it's getting harder and harder. More and more consumer devices have some sort of non-proprietary, some sort of proprietary or special screw head that you need in order to get inside. When we don't have an in-person event, we're trying to encourage tools and repair by deploying tools, even when places when we don't have an in-person event. So on the left-hand side is a poster from a program that we're running where we're making a modest set of tools, enough to disassemble a laptop or a tablet or a smartphone at a local public library, say behind a reference desk, or to check out. I'm trying to encourage that. And then on the right-hand side, we have bigger toolkits that circulate through a library system. So we actually use the interlibrary book loan vehicle to move the tools from library to library if somebody needs something that's more than that. Whoops. Now, it's one thing to be able to fix it electrically or mechanically, but things are starting to change now where it's getting harder because you also need to understand the software part as well. In this particular case, this person has a phone and she needs the phone to get critical calls from her doctor and her healthcare provider. But because there are so many pop-ups and stuff that come up and before she can get to the phone to answer it, she can't get to the, it goes to voicemail. So she's really frustrated. I mean, here's this great, amazing device and we're using it so she has access, we're giving it to her so she has accessibility, but she can't get to the stuff. And so something's going on here where this phone, we were really frustrated because we couldn't eliminate the pop-ups and stuff. And it turns out that there's like a special version of an operating system running on it. And lo and behold, afterwards we found out that yes, these Lifeline assistance phones that we give low-income people, they come from a vendor who basically gets them from some manufacturer overseas, and they're loaded with malware and spyware and other stuff. And it starts to speak to sort of what happens when you weave this stuff into your civilization. I mean, it starts to beg the question of to what extent should the economically disadvantaged have to exchange their privacy and security in order to access public services or to participate in our shared society. So more and more Fixit Clinic is becoming about digital literacy, digital equity, digital inclusion, economic justice. The other aspect to this is that all this technology is going into the landfill prematurely because we can't control it. We can't even change the battery in it if we want. But the two things that happen with smartphones is the batteries or the screens break. The batteries go bad or the screens break. But even then, what I'm implying also is that if they don't update the software, if you can't update the software, and over time, it becomes a security risk. It's leaking your personal information. And so it speaks to the very nature of ownership. Less and less we have the ability to choose how long we have something and how long we can choose to keep it. Not everybody needs the latest phone. So a lot of these perfectly good phones, they could be used by other people, but they can't because we can't repair them, both from a hardware perspective and a software perspective. It's not just individual consumers. So think about being a farmer, okay? We think of farmers as being can-do-it, roll up your shirt sleeves, resilient types of people, right? Well, the latest tractors and combines are such a combination of hardware and software that that's not true anymore. So the manufacturers are now saying, yes, you buy the tractor, but you buy only a license to the software, and we control the license to the software that runs on your tractor. So you could be a farmer trying to get the harvest in before it rains. And if your tractor breaks in the middle of the field, in the old days, you would just go and fix the part and keep harvesting. But now what happens is if you go back in and start up the tractor, it reboots the computer, it runs the diagnostics, it says, uh-oh, this tractor's been modified. You can't run this tractor until our service tech comes out and confirms that the repair is done properly or whatever. So there's some funny side effects to this. The manufacturers are using the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. This is a law that keeps us from pirating music and movies to enforce that ability to keep a farmer from repairing their own tractor. And so if you're a Canadian farmer and you buy a tractor, you're not subject to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. You can repair your own tractor. And the other thing that American farmers are doing is they found some Eastern European company that has reverse engineered the official software for the tractors and combines, and they're buying it from there so that they can bypass the manufacturer's software locks on this piece of equipment that they bought. Well, people didn't really understand these issues, but just last week, this YouTuber who has 14 million subscribers covered Right to Repair, and it's already gotten over 2 million views. And so the hope is that it will start to become a mainstream issue, that people will start to become aware of the idea that we need rights to repair the stuff that we own. And there's some stuff that's in place already, but it's not well enforced. So the Federal Trade Commission had a report they just also put out just last week that talked about the restrictions on repair. There is a law called the Magnuson-Moss Act that says that manufacturers cannot restrict repair unfairly. But it's very, very hard to enforce. So the specific example was this idea that if you look on the back of a Microsoft Xbox, it has a sticker that says you'll void your warranty if you open the device. And that is not true. So they actually sent a letter to companies like Microsoft and Sony basically saying, you can't put that sticker on the back of the device and scare people into trying to fix it. But the interesting one for this particular conversation is within that report was this quote, the burden of repair restrictions may fall more heavily on communities of color and lower income communities, because they're the people with the least resources to figure out how to do this stuff. When you have something that breaks and you don't know how to go to get repair or whatever. So I can fully understand and respect why they put that in the report. The Europeans, who always seem ahead of us on these sorts of issues, they in France went ahead and published and has announced this repairability index that they are instituting in France, where when you buy something, the manufacturer has to have a little sign there that says how durable the item is. And they have a whole set of criteria. So the problem right now is that this repairability index is covered by the manufacturer. It's manufacturer reported repairability index. We're hoping over time that we'll be able to provide them with a real user data that from the field that will help to reinforce this repairability index going forward. But it's a step in the right direction. It's just that the Europeans are always way ahead of us on this sort of stuff. Beyond individual consumers and farmers or individual people like that, we have to look at our broader societal ways we think about purchasing. And so I'm looking at institutional purchasing alongside right to repair for individual consumers. So I'm looking at government or corporate or any sort of institutional large purchasing and how we choose it and how we think about those purchases that we make. So in this particular instance, this is Alameda County Library System. And they had these book carts, and these book carts are incredibly durable. They can hold hundreds and hundreds of pounds of books, and they're wonderful book carts. They're old, but they're wonderful book carts, and they were on the loading dock, destined for salvage, and all because they just had like one bad wobbly wheel. Nobody ever thought to even turn them over and think, let's see if we can't fix these things. So we brought a bunch of these back in, but it speaks to sort of broader way we think in society that new is always better than used or repaired. I don't know. I don't think that the new book carts they would buy to replace these book carts would really be more durable than the ones we saw here. And so like we basically did this thing where we had a donor book cart which had 3 good wheels, and we took those 3 good wheels and applied them to the other book carts that were broken. And then the next step is to look for, can we buy new wheels for the one that we used as the donor book cart? But nobody thinks that way these days. I mean, it's sort of prevalent. We, as consumers, they have us wired up to think that we should always buy new. And somehow it's supporting the economy or something if we move forward and stuff. And for me personally, I look at this and say, these are my tax dollars, okay? I want them used efficiently. And at the national level, here's an example. In New York Times, there was an op-ed that they were having this training exercise in South Korea, and there was a generator, and the generator broke. And not only could the Marines not fix it, they were not allowed to fix it. That the agreement, the purchase agreement between the Department of Defense and this generator manufacturer was that the generator had to be returned to the United States for service. So obviously in the middle of a war, I mean, that's not gonna cut it. And so this was interesting at a bunch of levels. One is, that an op-ed like this is not some rogue officer. This is obviously something that was really clearly sanctioned by higher ups. And I have this military example, but look, this is probably true all over all branches of government. Okay, this sort of stuff is happening. And that speaks to this other more insidious aspect, which is whether you're an individual or or a corporation or the government, any entity that moves away from understanding the things that it relies on is fundamentally at systemic risk. Well, we saw that during the pandemic. Okay, you remember early in the pandemic when we thought we were going to run out of ventilators and there was a national stockpile of ventilators, but nobody even knew what condition that stockpile of ventilators was in. Or, we also had situations where we were running out of PPE, like the doctors wearing on the right. It became a bad scene, and it speaks to this idea that maybe we've taken globalization too far, and that there is something to be said for us being able to have the resiliency to be able to manufacture and have local supplies of things. So at this point, Fixit Clinic stepped up. I mean, we launched this rapid response repair initiative where we said we agree to repair not just individual people's things, but anything that needs fixing within the society. Okay, yes, if it's ventilators, but also anything that makes a critical care responder or a first responder's life easy. If it could be their own personal smartphone, it could be the coffee maker in the break room in the hospital. We didn't care. We were ready for this because it's an honor and a sacred obligation to help if you can. Whoops, wrong way. And so we waited for the bat signal, and luckily it never came for the critical care equipment. Luckily the med techs didn't get sick en masse. But what did happen is a lot of people started making coronavirus masks at home, and they dug out their old sewing machine and started sewing on it a lot, making a lot of masks, and they started breaking. So we started seeing a lot of breaking sewing machines, and we continue to see a lot of breaking sewing machines at the Zoom Fixit clinics that we started holding during the pandemic. So these Zoom Fixit clinics, what are these Zoom Fixit clinics? Well, they're just wonderful. This is this amazing thing that happened as a result of the pandemic, that basically repairers and people with broken things from around the world, we come together via Zoom, and we were trying to test the hypothesis. Could we even fix things? Was there even a chance that we could fix things? And the answer is, of course. It was great. It was wonderful how many people were out there, basically hands-off, touchless repair we were able to do via Zoom. Here's some examples of people and their items and where they were from. So Palestine, Scotland, France, the UK, and poor Sandeep in the lower right from Melbourne, Australia, got up at 4:30 in the morning so he could participate in a Fixit clinic. We also added this Discord server. And Discord is this gaming channel. For those of you who don't know, it's a platform for gamers, and we have repurposed it for repair. And that's also been rocking and rolling. So this provides for 24/7, around the clock, around the world repair. So right after this Zoom, you could get onto this Discord server with something broken, and there's a good chance there's somebody awake somewhere on the planet who can start to help you with it. Okay, President Biden, and he's holding a computer chip. So we have this new administration and this whole idea of build back better, buy American, buy local. I don't know if you know, but right now, for example, there's this automobile chip shortage, and it's actually caused some of the manufacturers to shut down their assembly lines because they can't get the computer chips to make the cars. Okay, let's look at what's going on with that. So on the left-hand side, you have a highly integrated piece of electronics that's probably made in a city like the one shown on the right. But imagine that we have this new, different alternative future that's coming to bear right now, where a combination of, digitally informed manufacturing and this idea that a lot of this kind of tech capability that used to cost millions of dollars now costs thousands of dollars and might soon cost hundreds of dollars, that we might see a whole different way where we might be able to reshore or localize a lot of the manufacturing, that tightly integrated manufacturing that we've sent around the world at the moment. So as a kind of a semi-specious example, imagine that the next toaster you buy doesn't come to you from China via Amazon, but instead when you choose you need a toaster, you press return on your computer, and a digital file gets propagated to all these micro factories around the San Francisco Bay Area, for example. And the parts of your toaster are assembled at each of these micro factories, and then they're they're put together and it comes to you a couple of days later and it's the color that you need for your kitchen and it's automatically on the frozen bagel setting because that's the one you use every morning. And then in the future, if any part of it breaks, you have the digital file for that part. So you send it off again to the microfactory that made it originally, and they send you the new part, you snap it back into place and you keep going. So you could essentially keep that toaster running forever. Cool. And so we're experimenting with this at Fixit Clinic now. We're already looking at that sort of level of electronics. Can we do that kind of repair on the stuff we have in our world now? At UCSF, they have a maker's lab where the people there who are they're trained in biology. They're really brilliant with healthcare, but they're trying to design new medical devices or new types of techniques for medicine or for healthcare. And we're supporting that effort by collaborating with their Makers Lab to try and help the researchers there create better and better human outcomes for human health. And we're very proud of that collaboration. Across the bay in San Leandro at a makerspace, they have one of those devices that can make that kind of highly integrated electronic circuitry. So it's early days still. I mean, they can only make them one at a time. They can't make them in the millions like Apple needs to produce the next smartphone. But it's the start of the idea that we might have this new vision for mass customization manufacturing on demand. And here's an example of what that might look like if everything had a digital twin. If everything had not just the blueprint, not just sort of like the electronics and the wiring and the schematics, but also the information about how it works in real time and stuff like that. This idea that we could have this capability. Now, for a lot of things, they have this capability already. They just don't share it with us as the people who actually use this stuff. And so maybe over time, the idea is that we start to ask for this, or they start to realize that it's a commercial benefit to provide us with this level of information around the things that we own. And that's part of why we work with all of these illustrious universities, that we're trying to teach the next generation of practitioners how to design for durability, maintainability, serviceability, repairability for the future coming circular economy, alongside teaching design for manufacturing. So I'm winding down now. So, there was this sense of repair as being a militant or revolutionary act. But really, I think it's about people just wanting to sort of activate their own personal curiosity about the world around them and the things that they use. There's also this idea of repair as a beautiful thing. I mean, this is the ancient Japanese art of kintsugi, of ceramic repair, where the repaired item is considered more beautiful and more valuable than the original. And every time this thing breaks and it's repaired visibly, there's this sense of the story associated with how that break happened. And so the provenance of the item grows over time and becomes more of a treasure. Could we elevate repair to something like that in our modern society? So I would laugh normally, but about a month ago at the last Zoom Fixit Clinic, this woman showed up with this pencil sharpener from the 1970s. And she's tried to buy a new pencil sharpener to replace this broken one, but as the quote says, I've returned 2 new ones in the last 2 weeks. Junk. I mean, the new items are not as good as this one that she had, and she wanted to get this working again, and we did. So for her, this is sort of the equivalent of the kintsugi thing that we talked about in the last slide. And there's so many examples I can give of items like that, items that are really well made and durable if we just keep them in service and keep repairing them. And they'll last for generations. Well, that's hard when we have this sort of like in our culture, as consumers, we're wired to think that everything's disposable. And this picture is from my local Nextdoor site. This is a bench full of, there must be $1,000 worth of appliances and tech on this table. And the Nextdoor post just had this one photograph and these 3 sentences. Didn't bother testing. Don't know what works or not. Please don't ask. It speaks to our own way that we treat this stuff so cavalierly. We think it's free to throw it away. I mean, this person, might even pay, he or she might even pay people to throw this stuff out, to get this stuff out of their lives. And they spend so much money on it initially. And everybody's in conspiracy on this. So this is a major retailer who you can probably figure out. And they have this ad in the store bragging about how we've worked together to recycle all these car seats. So car seats have an expiration date on them, and you're supposed to recycle them by the expiration date. Well, the investigative journalist Adam Minter looked into this, and it turns out that none of the car seat manufacturers can cite any sort of research for why there is a expiration date on car seats. So it's not as if they've done any testing on durability or anything. They just kind of stamped it on there, and we're all just going along with it. So the Swedish government has asked their citizens, they said, you know what, stop throwing car seats in the recycling. It's possible that you can keep using them forever. But it also speaks to the side that we should flip over that and think about how we think about designing car seats to be heirloom car seats. So that maybe, you know, like you would say, oh, this was your great grandfather's car seat, and then it was your grandmother's car seat, and then it was your father's car seat, and now it's your car seat, and you're going to pass this car seat on to your kids when they need it. Or maybe it's a civilization. You know, we think it's a government. We think, okay, you know, based on what we think the population is going to be, we think we need this many car seats for the next 30 years. Let's just make that group of car seats and just keep them for the society going forward. You know, it speaks to thinking differently about how we do our consumption, and we're not doing that right now. So this is the future I envision, where everybody is curious about what they own, and they have the ability to open it up and diagnose it, and to change things if they want, and to sort of foster and encourage that inquisitiveness about the things around you. So that whether you're 16 or 60, you can decide whether or not you keep your smartphone working or move to a new one, upgrade it, keep it for as long as you need to. So that we can have less of this going on in civilization, this churn of stuff, and more of this going on. I mean, she encapsulates our shared vision for the future, I think. She's self-actualized, she's inquisitive, she's empowered, she's determined, she's fearless. She's all the things we want for ourselves in our shared future. So with that, I'll stop and I'll take questions. So thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you so much, Peter. It's just, you know, that is so comprehensive, so timely, and just kind of, I think it cross-sects so much of society, but also at our role in the university. And I thought what you brought up in terms of, you know, the things that really interest me are the sort of what you mentioned in terms of the cavalier nature of the ways in which, you know, that entire stash of electronics and appliances just kind of dropped, like as if they are so useless, just get them out of my life. And the flip side of that is the cavalier way in which we, as soon as something breaks, will go to replace it. You know, the mass consumerism is just, it's all around us, right? It is very ever present. It doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon. How do you see Fixit, you know, given that it requires this deep level of care, this deep level of interest of trying to, you know, learn one person at a time, teach one person at a time, while also, you know, holding these corporations accountable for rights to repair? How do you see Fixit culture intersecting and intervening in this culture of mass disposability, mass manufacture, as you said, where they're designing things for planned obsolescence?
Well, at the end of the day, what I tell people is I'm trying to put myself out of business in this Fixit Clinic world, at least. You know, in so much, there's no business model here really, except that, like I've been implying, we want to make things more durable going forward. And we have examples of things that got better and more robust over time. But now I think we've gone to the far end of that curve where now it's all about cost. It's all about how inexpensively can we sell it to Walmart so that they can pass on those savings to us, and without any regard for what was the embodied energy that was put into, you know, all the way back to refining the metals, to mining the metals that went into this precious device that we're holding now, and what's going to happen to it at the end too. So like I said, people think we're not paying the true cost of the items when we purchase them, and people think it's free to throw it away. So those are the two things we have to counter. And I don't know the answers yet. I mean, I would love, that's why I'm, you know, giving presentations like this, I'd love to like have some great minds help to figure out how we can change that, because I'm trying to go for this wholesale change in the consumer mindset at the end of the day.
Wow. Yeah. And yeah, just kind of thinking about incentives and corporate incentives or legal policies that can kind of hold accountability, or taxing structures that, you know, a waste tax or producer tax or something that can just be more strict seems really necessary. I see there is a raised hand in the audience from Dr. H. So we'd love to call on you.
Hi, thank you so much for the great presentation. And I think more than a question, it's a comment, you know, that I learned to sew when I was in Girl Scouts, right? So I have found it really interesting that over the years, so that was like, you know, let's just say hypothetically, right, 30 years ago, how we don't do anything to teach young people how to do simple things to keep their clothing, you know. So we have such a fast fashion culture that people will throw away a shirt because a button fell off, or they'll, you know, or something simple that could be easily fixed even by hand. They don't even need a sewing machine. They never learn to do it. So it doesn't even enter their mind, right? So I've been thinking about how we might advocate to teach young people those skills in school. They used to teach it and they don't anymore. So I just wondered if you know of any schools that are implementing that type of learning, and or your thoughts on it.
Oh, absolutely. So I would love for repair to be the new shop class. And like I said, it's about generalizing critical thinking and troubleshooting skills. And so let's figure out how to revitalize that. Now, the sewing thing, I was very heavy on my emphasis in electronics because we started in the San Francisco Bay Area, the center of tech. But honestly, you know, we see a lot of fabric and textile stuff too. And Fixit Clinic is kind of like improv. You never know what the general public is going to present to you. So, right. so I'm totally for fabric and textile repair. And we could talk for a long time about that. I've got, you know, when I talked earlier about sort of this sliding degeneration, the best sewing machines are the sewing machines from the 1960s to the early 1980s.
I saw my grandmother's machine that doesn't, you know, it just has one stitch. It goes forward and backward and it's still working great. So
right. And those things are going to the landfill in Moss right now. I'm trying to save as many as I can, in my garage, and it's getting crazy. Okay. because the modern ones, those old ones had metal gears and they could sew through layers of denim or leather.
Yes.
And the modern ones that you buy at the store they're just junk. They're plastic gears. They don't last. You can't adjust them.
Yeah. Well, if you ever want someone to come down and teach how to repair by hand, I'd be happy to do that. You know, I think more people need to appreciate that simple things can save a garment, and you can be really creative too, you know, and make changes to a garment if you know how to sew by hand. You don't even need a machine, right? So
on the Discord server right now, we have a fabric and textiles channel, so that anybody who joins the Discord who has, I want to darn a sock, you know, we could have somebody come on and show them how to do that.
Great. Great. Well, thanks for all the great work and the presentation.
So I'll just say, Dr. H, I would love to take that that in-person class of, you know, non-mechanical, just, you know, weaving buttons together, whatever you're offering. I will take that for sure. And then Peter, also for the Discord, we love to plug people in through this event to your Discord server. You know, you said it's a 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week resource. And I have a link here, but I'm not sure if it's the correct link. So I wanted to see if you have that available or what would be the best means for people to plug into that.
Yeah, so if they already use Discord, it's easy. But for people who are new to the platform, it's a little involved. So probably the best thing to do is send them to well, you expect me in the middle of my presentation to go scramble for that, huh? We'll send it to them afterwards.
I have a link here. Hold on. It's a Google Doc, right?
No, it's the bit.ly doc on repairing. It's a bit.ly doc if you want, but
okay. Well, I'm gonna.
Basically, it's the sign up for whether you want to sign up for Zoom or Discord. It's one site, and then you just click on the I want to join the Discord server, and I'll take it from there.
Okay, great, thanks. I added a few links in the chat. They're partially relevant, and some of them have, like the Facebook page for Fixit has a whole list of different events. You know, definitely follow them, because particularly because they're online now, you can literally be, you know, they can be hosted in Ontario, and we can, you know, tune in on them from here. I noticed Amanda has her hand raised, so let's take Amanda's question.
Hello. First of all, I just want to thank you for this short presentation and the work you do. It's really fascinating just to learn, like, just to know that there are organizations out there teaching people how to fix things for themselves and really understanding and valuing the materials they have. I really love learning about how to be resourceful with stuff. Something I was kind of thinking about is when I was little, like I used to ruin some of my dolls, like, you know, cutting off all their hair and thinking it would grow back and stuff like that. And when I got into high school, I kind of saw more people on YouTube teaching like how to fix those dolls, like how to reroot their hair. So I learned how to like reroot doll hair and stuff like that. So I guess I was curious if your Fixit Clinic also offers like tutorials on how to fix toys, whether it be like dolls or like electronic toys or trucks and stuff like that.
Sure. I mean, like I said, it's like improv. You never know what the general public's going to bring you. So all those things exist on the Discord server. And if you brought it to one of our Zooms, like if you brought it, it's too late for the Zoom on Saturday. We're locked and loaded with all the participants. But part of this is bringing this global resource. There are people all over the planet who know how to do this stuff, and bringing them together so that somebody somewhere can help you with that. You know, and you're right, YouTube's become this wonderful resource for looking stuff up and how to fix things. So lots of times, you know, you'll bring it to Discord and people will say, oh yeah, I happened to see the YouTube video last month on how to do that. So it sort of saves you a bunch of scouring the planet and scouring various resources to try to figure out how to make it happen.
Cool, thank you.
So, you know, while people are still generating their questions, I did want to kind of sit with the conversation you started around digital tech and surveillance, just because you have brought up this question of equity and the burden of this sort of tech and surveillance on low-income communities and communities of color. And, you know, I'm just, you know, how do you see this intersection of rights to repair and big tech and data surveillance? It's making me think of, you know, a professor actually at UC Santa Cruz, Hilary Angelo, who wrote this book, How Green Became Good. And it's about sort of the future, the greenwashed future of, you know, the smart city, this, you know, the eco city that has all of this new technology. So it's, you know, there's an environmental and an energy embedded into this new technology, but also within that technology of the smart grid is this level of surveillance that wasn't there in past appliances. And I'm curious, I mean, this has implications with, you know, the discourse around the Green New Deal, but also, you know, you touched on this topic of newer is better. And I'm thinking about, you know, just the ways in which we take that blindly without necessarily interrogating what also, you know, what ecologically might be at stake, but also what socially might be at stake when we start to adopt these new sort of Siri-based, you know, technological, you know, sources that may, you know, at some point I'm like, is our jacket gonna have, you know, GPS on it or whatever? So I'm curious, you know, I mean, you know, if you have any thoughts to, you know, expand on this question of surveillance, digital tech, sort of the new age technology that is also really efficient, but might come with these other costs.
No, there's a balance where we basically sacrificed our personal privacy for convenience. And right now it's not clear that that's, let's see what happens. I mean, I guess our question is, how do we create discriminating consumers or just discriminating citizens, you know, people in civilization who understand, hey, you know, this may or may not be a good or a bad thing, but it you know, it speaks to this idea of why are we so willing to relinquish our power for independent thought? and try to understand what's really happening here. You know, I see one of the big challenges is that we don't really have a price on our personal privacy. No one's really figured out how to for us to understand all this information about ourselves. We're sort of leaking out to these private companies. You know, in other countries, they're leaking it out to the states. But here in the United States, we leak it out to private companies. Now, what is that trade-off really getting us? And you know, there are some incredible people thinking about these issues. Okay, it's just at this point the cat's out of the bag. We may have this fallback where there's more regulation in this space, and I think that that's good. I personally have this idea that we should really all have our own personal server that has the information that right now we're letting Facebook and Google and all these other companies have, and that we just leak out the information, enough information to make the transaction at that moment occurs. All right, so that the moment that I step into the Uber, the driver knows that I will pay for the ride, and I know the driver will take me where I need to go. And then once I close the door of the Uber and leave, that information degenerates. Okay, that the transaction's done and it just goes away. Okay, or it returns to my server, it returns to the Uber driver server, and we're through. But obviously a lot of business models would collapse on that. So we need some new types of business models and or regulation to basically say that kind of business model doesn't help anybody. We need to move on from that.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm just thinking about sort of my role here at PoCSC, and also I'm on the Carbon Fund Committee at UC Santa Cruz. So kind of transitioning this into, I think the goal of today was thinking through, how can students and student leaders and students and staff and faculty kind of think through the university a different way. But even on the Carbon Fund, which is basically student paid for funds to improve energy efficiency on campus and other sort of zero waste sustainability goals, you see a lot of this newer is better sort of mindset that takes over. And I know we've had conversations in the past, you and I, about sort of Energy Star rating, and you mentioned the word conspiracy earlier. And so I was curious to hear your thoughts on sort of the opportunity cost. Like people are asking for like $30,000 to replace, old lab equipment, which might make it run faster. But what about all of this energy that's embedded in the older unit and in the newer unit? And I just would love to hear some of your thoughts on that. And then maybe we can transition into sort of strategy and implementation of deeply thinking through sustainability and repair our UCSC campus.
Oh, geez, man, that's while you were talking, I was thinking about the example I'm struggling with right now is that solar panels. So, humor me here for a minute, but in Northern California, or in California, we've been encouraging people to put solar panels up for 20 years. And that's a positive thing. But now the incentives are to take them down and replace them with newer solar panels. And the problem is that the older solar panels are more durable. They may not be as degenerated as people are claiming, but the policy, the government incentives to replace are so strong that even if you have perfectly fine solar panels up in place on a roof, and I'm not talking just residential, I'm talking acres and acres and acres of commercial solar panel on tops of warehouses everywhere, that they'll just take it down and there's no good way to demanufacture it. Okay, at this point, there's too much glass for the e-waste manufacturers, there's too much e-waste for the glass manufacturers. And so what ends up happening is these solar panels get trucked to the desert in Nevada where they get buried. And California doesn't want to be participating in that. So it becomes this whole Megillah of trying to figure out how you begin to unwind something like that. The worst thing, or to add insult to injury, this January, a new law went into effect that said all new construction must include solar panels. So what the manufacturers have done to respond to that is now all the solar panels made in China and India, they now have this new contractor grade solar panel, which is this like really crappy solar panel grade that will just fulfill the requirement of needing to put a solar panel up, but it won't last very long. I mean, the minute a contractor steps on it on the roof or a hailstorm comes, the solar panels might break. So we're kind of compounding the problem. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. I mean, I got re-stimulated by what you were saying to bring up that example, but it speaks to sort of the intertwinedness of the whole the whole situation that we're in right now.
I mean, I think it really, you're speaking at such an interesting, especially at this time, with this. I think most of us, we are advocating. I've been a part of the Sunrise Movement, which is all about, Green New Deal, renewable energy, and sometimes, no matter what, renewable energy is always going to be considered better. And there's also so many issues with the sort of old electric grid that is very energy intensive and emissions intensive. But kind of thinking through the life cycle of batteries, of e-waste, and also the environmental justice implications. There's, I know I think it's in Vernon in East Los Angeles, there's a battery disposal area that has like totally, brought a lot of, lead, acid and stuff into the local environment. And it's a little bit worrisome. I think it might be a step in the direction of progress to think through renewable, but sometimes I feel like, progress is like one step forward and two steps backward, particularly given that these might, as you're saying, being designed and, and with minimizing production costs in mind. So they're made quite cheaply and probably with the cheapest materials in order to mass produce them, which makes them, also another source of this disposal that we're trying to remedy. And so it does feel like we're in kind of a catch-22. And it's just, yeah, I don't know.
So in my presentation, I implied that this was mostly about sort of design, like designers and engineers, but believe me, there's a whole capability, policy, environmental stuff, all this stuff needs to be put together to make this happen. I mean, one of the problems with the way we design legislation now is that this law turns its way through our political process and gets voted on and gets instantiated, like this law that says that we're supposed to have, all new construction in California must have solar panels as of January 1st, 2021. But then we don't factor into the law when we write it, we don't factor into a law an opportunity to test and provide continuous integration, like to basically say, is this policy, is this law that we passed actually having the intent that we intended? And so there's a whole group of people looking now at sort of digital law, basically like we decide on a policy and then we basically use artificial intelligence to write the law in a way that makes sure that we can constantly make sure the law works right going forward. Now, that means that we have to get the policy right up front. So it makes it a different challenge, but it's an interesting idea of how like our whole legal system could not be write a law, it's in the books, and then you got to follow it, to write a law, and the law is really sort of this loose framework for this policy we're trying to get right as a civilization. And how do we basically think about that?
Okay. Yeah. And I guess maybe we can go into the UCSC specific nature, not necessarily about law, but about institutional policy, questions of procurement, mass procurement. Can you speak a little bit? I know you've worked with other universities, Berkeley, and also this is for all the students here and anyone involved with UCSC or who has more working knowledge of procurement or ideas of how we can kind of think more deeply, strategically nuanced about sort of mass consumption and our role as students in the university, feel free to chime in. But yeah, can you just expand a little bit on sort of what visions you see within a university setting on more of a cultural level? I think there's that pedagogical approach, right? We've talked about, you shared the youth and sort of this dream and this vision of youth being self-actualized, being more resilient on one level, right? Learning the learning outcomes and what we're not learning versus what we are. And Dr. H brought that up with how youth are not, we don't know how to fix our broken things or our, a tear in our shirts, but also on a more structural level, maybe, if you have any experience thinking through like what are universities buying in mass and what things could we leverage as student and student activists within the university to try to, build more, I don't want to say corporate social responsibility, but sort of this more circular economy and embed that within our own institution.
Okay, well, let me see if I can answer that. So I've been involved with right to repair at any number of levels for a while now, but what I'm kind of coming to this realization that as long as it's like framed as this consumer rights issue, that the manufacturers will just pick us apart. They'll just, you know, as one of, we're always going to lose that battle. And so what I start to do is look at this, like large purchasing, institutional purchasing. And so I really only have 2 data points at this point. I've presented to Alameda County General Services Administration about this idea that let's say we add wording to the request for quote or request for proposal that says preference will be given to a vendor who provides us with repair parts, diagnostic tools, and service manuals, so that we get to choose how we do the repair, and we can do that repair locally. And if we do that repair locally, that's this opportunity for creating a lot of local industry, local jobs, and over time building a practice and local knowledge about computers. So you can say, oh yeah, those specific brand of laptops, the A key on those always goes out, and this is how you fix that. And then over time, you could basically come up with some localized type of manufacturing. And maybe there's the Alameda County laptop, for example, or something like that. The other example is the Pacifica School District superintendent. She has to buy 1,000 Chromebooks for her students. And I was trying to encourage her, make that same case, okay? And let's have your 6th graders learn how to repair the Chromebooks. So I'm looking at so across the institution, across like a UC, like a system-wide or campuses, wow. I mean, you know, there are other issues, like for example, when someone gets a government grant, they usually write into the grant they need all new lab equipment and all new laptops, because as long as you're going for a multi-million-dollar grant, you might as well go for everything. And then when the grant is granted, you have to use it in the way that you specified. So there is this tendency to just encourage the churn. So yeah, okay, we had 3-year-old laptops, but we just got this new grant. So when those laptops go, we buy new laptops. So something that starts to encourage at various levels. You know, I'd love for UC academics to say, I didn't need new laptops for this grant, and if you don't give them to me, I'll be able to put this much more money into the actual research that I think you want to be funding, and to have the government grantor say, oh, that's really cool that they do that. Let's give them the money. So you know, or when the institution has to buy, you know, any number of things along those lines. Think about how they can source it locally. Think about what the real cost is as opposed to what's the bottom line price, because that's what a lot of things basically say. They don't want corruption. They don't want fraud to occur. They don't want someone paying $2,000 for a toilet seat like the military does. So the encouragement is always to pick the low cost provider, but we have to think about different factors when we decide what the low cost provider really is, I guess.
Yeah, that sounds like a very, just like a comprehensive approach to this. And it just that treadmill is just it's so incentivized. And I know that just as someone who applies for grants and budgets, and oftentimes the labor itself is undervalued, so that and the big tech equipment is heavily valued, and this research equipment sort of, and you can see that within the university's tendency to sort of preference STEM investment, right, and computer science investment, biomedical investment, as at the expense of sort of this, I would consider this also very much a deep investment in the humanities and social sciences through repair work, which is a more like I would imagine it as being like a longer term commitment to you know, a product's life cycle, et cetera, and community that comes through that. And you know, I do want to talk about community, you know, UCSC community. I know, Hayden, you have some experience when it comes to fixing stuff. And so, you know, I know you had a question about just sort of recommendations or starting points, but did you want to?
Yeah, I do have a question about that, but I think we do have a question from the audience from Mark. His hand's raised real quick. So Mark, if you want to go ahead and ask yours, and I'll jump in with mine in a minute.
Hi, and it's I guess more maybe a kind of just a food for thought kind of things, not some more so much a question per se, or could be. But my role on campus is in student housing. And so what drew me to this event is because, I remember the first, summer after I, started working here during move out, right? And going to the dumpsters and the recycling bays and just seeing, all the appliances that may or may not be broken, but they're just out there because I'm moving out and I don't have any place for them in the car, or, I'm moving to a new place and there's no space for this. And so up until now, really the conversation that we're just trying to bend is just reduction, right? Like, and so really kind of pushing this, like, how can we really kind of get at like bringing what we need and like kind of like, taking things home during breaks and all that kind of stuff. But I think like something like this, this idea, right, in the residential area, in the residential population, I think could really put some teeth behind. We have a sustainability committee within our student housing department, but I think, getting connected with something like this would really kind of put our money where our mouth is when we're talking about, okay, how can we in residential life and student housing help reduce a lot of the electrical and appliance kind of waste. And so beyond just, reduction, try not to bring stuff, take stuff home, because that can only go so far. And I think, or how do you think, potentially, I don't know if you've worked with like student housing. I saw you mention like the grad student housing that happened, it happened in grad student housing. And so how have been past experiences working with residential populations in terms of, making an impact on that move out, pile up that happens at the end of every year?
Oh yeah, so our work with Harvard University, Harvard Recycling, it talks about at the move out time, basically they end up with so much crap. And I'm sorry to put it, I mean, I should really express it a different way, which is really all this stuff that was a very high utility, which at this point has been reduced to e-waste or, other types of waste, okay? And, it's Harvard, so it's printers, okay? But the students are smart enough to know to take out the cartridges before they throw the printer away because they know the cartridges are valuable. Okay, and so they end up just with this printer that's not good to anybody anymore, or because you end up with some brand new piece of clothing that grandma sent for the kid at college, but they don't want to touch it because they'd much rather have some other thing, right? So just all sorts of stuff that just ends up. Don't get me started. It happens to me, like I'm pointing up the hill to UC Berkeley. It happens there every move out too. So the chat. Look, I challenged you guys during the beginning of this. How do we make this something? How do we try some experiment at UCSC along these lines? Suppose we could just take one floor of one dorm and basically like say, this is a fully pre-furnished dorm floor where every dorm room comes with its own coffee maker and microwave. And, I don't know what you allow in the, I don't know what kind of cooking you allow in the dorms, but just it's fully furnished. And if something breaks, we've got a supply of other ones. Either we can help you fix it, or we've got a whole supply of these. Just bring your coffee maker down to this room, take another working one off the shelf and put this one in the pile of ones to be fixed. So rather than throw this stuff to e-waste, I'd love to, or to waste, I'd love to figure out some way to sort of like run some sort of cheap and dirty quick experiment that way. Maybe it's a resource to international students or to scholarship students or something, that they get fully furnished rooms with full appliances, something like that.
Yeah, and I think that's feasible. We haven't necessarily created, and Mark, it's so great that you're here, being involved with Oaks, and that's why we're so grateful to have multiple stakeholders on this, from staff to resource centers, but also staff and within the residential situation, and kind of thinking about this question of a repository as well, and kind of being able to have a buffer period to hold these things, to be able to assess what's broken from what's not, what's easily fixable from what's been, rather than just letting stuff go in the rain or go to the landfill or go to, like even you mentioned, or at least I've heard you mention, the Goodwill just like plugs it in, if it doesn't turn on, they don't even do a diagnostic or anything. It just kind of goes to the landfill. And, this is also a teaching opportunity. It can shift our culture, the way we relate to each other. It's not just an environmental justice or an environmental or an energy usage issue. It's actually like, these are opportunities where we can relate to each other and I think in very beautiful, careful, like, I don't want to use the word sacred, but like kind of thinking about all of these things as having this, you know, embedded energy and the toxins that have been put into them, and kind of seeing them in a new light. So it, on the, you know, if we can do that in Oaks, Mark, we'd be super down. So we should stay, you know, let's keep in touch with you and Peter and think through this. But Hayden, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, actually, I just shifting gears a little bit. You've talked about this a good deal amount in your presentation. I think one of my questions would be, let's say you have never fixed anything ever in your life, like you like screwdriver, you don't own one. What How would you start to become more savvy in terms of repair? Like where is the starting point? Because I know a lot of people probably here in this talk don't know how to start. And where would you recommend? Like, is there a resource guide? Would you say YouTube?
I mean, it's about your personal motivation. How motivated are you? You know, if you're desperate, if you like absolutely positively have to get this thing working, if you're a grad student and the centrifuge in your lab breaks and, you know, basically you've got to get out that piece of research, you don't graduate, like, you know, I don't know, like how, like, actually I do know. Okay, so maybe I'm being too precise about the answer, but there's wonderful resource site. My friend Kyle, who runs iFixit in San Luis Obispo, has this site where they're trying to post all these repair manuals and repair guides for fixing stuff. That's what I'm trying to do with Fixit Clinic. Okay, that's why I have the global fixer server and the Zooms, is to try to encourage people that it really isn't so hard. Now, here's the other thing about this, okay, that the reason why we were always about teaching people how to fish as opposed to handing them a fish is because when the thing starts working again and they fixed it, it's like Easter. I mean, you know, it's like why would you want to deny somebody that incredible feeling that you get when it starts working again and you materially participated in making it work again? So yeah, I mean, but we're fighting that mindset of the idea that new is always better than used. So a lot of people's first tendency is to figure, yeah, you know, fudge, it doesn't work anymore. I have to go and buy a new one. And so maybe what we're really just trying to convey is that repair is possible. You know, actually repair is probable, but, you know, but for, you know, just to start with the idea that people think, you know, there might be a chance I can fix this. And there's always going to be that subset of people who really are all thumbs and really don't want to be involved. They just want to go and fix it. And I'd love to have them have a resource too. But at this point, at least in Northern California, you know, repair is just disappeared totally. There is no longer, there used to be like a store called Mr. Toaster that fixed appliances. They're gone. And I don't know, and I'm trying to encourage this idea of it coming back. I don't know if it looks the same way, but something like that, where we have that capability in the society, because we need it for resilience purposes, if nothing else.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know from experience that fixing things has it is very rewarding. And I know from experience that it's way cheaper. My wallet has definitely smiled at me because I fixed a couple things.
So Hayden, I'm afraid to ask this because you should never ask a question when you don't already know the answer in advance in one of these Zooms. But you mentioned something in one of the pre-Zooms that we had about what Mark was saying about something about like UC Santa Cruz has a rule that you can't use something that's been donated by a student.
Yeah.
Can you say more about that just for a moment?
There are definitely certain restrictions when it comes to it's technically considered abandoned property. So a lot of the legality regarding obtaining this stuff that's just left there, it's kind of fuzzy because you don't necessarily know if the university can just take it. Because yes, it was left on university property, but there's no note stipulating that yes, I want this used for a Fixit floor. You don't know whose this is, and you don't know if they might come back for it, even if it's been left for like years. You don't the allotted time for something to be abandoned property, and what you're supposed to do with abandoned property as technically landlords, as the university is really, really. I don't want to say finicky, but it's complicated. And so that's something we'd have to work out if housing were to do a whole thing where it's like an entire floor is just pre-furnished. One way that I've yeah, unfortunately. And one way that I've been able to kind of avoid that, because I myself, like my mini fridge that I have here was given to me by a friend of a friend of a friend who was leaving. It's like, yeah, no, I'm not going to use this fridge ever again. Take it. And same with my current microwave. But it's very difficult to work around just because.
Okay, so here's some
much
policy that the university instituted because they had some one-off incident that occurred at some point. And they just decided out of hand, okay, at this point, we're going to make this crazy rule. Okay, so the question is how we can be creative about working around that to help Mark institute something like that if we have to. But
I wanted to acknowledge Victoria's question. And Victoria, feel free to chip in, speak if you'd like. Would you like to, or would you like me to read it?
I can read it. I'll read it. It was in regards to the Green New Deal, which had been brought up earlier, and then just I guess consumerism in general, and how GMC's like rolling out their greener hybrid cars in the next 4 or 5 years now, and how just as a society we consume so much stuff that we're just throwing old things away. And I've just been wondering, and this is just a personal question, because I have a car and it's old, and I just have been wondering, like, how can I do better for the earth? Like, how would I possibly be able to like make my car like a hybrid? Is that possible to like literally switch out the engine and like turn it into a hybrid? Like, are there people that are actually trying to solve this problem? Is this an issue that's like ever been brought up to you before? It's just like all of the cars that are just going to be thrown away in the next 5 years.
So remember that the embodied energy that it took to bring that car together, to mine the metals, to heat the steel, to bring it together, that honestly, just driving an old car into the ground might be the best thing you can do for the planet, because you're not reinvesting the resources into some new device that's going to replace it. So yeah, we are coming towards the end of big oil. I mean, yeah, there's all sorts of other factors about, well, the new car doesn't produce greenhouse gases as you use it, but it certainly created greenhouse gases to make it. So it's possible that just keeping that old car of yours in place and working may be the best thing we can do. And once again, we have a policy. So like I have, until very recently, I was driving a 1988 Honda Civic. Okay, so the car was 30 years old. The car was older than a lot of you on this call, right? And finally, what happened? The state has this policy that says, well, at some point, from a greenhouse gas perspective, we want to take these old cars off the road because they provide more airborne pollutant. But they don't factor in the part about the idea, yeah, but if I go out and buy a brand new Tesla, I mean, the mining of the coltan and the lithium and the stuff for the batteries and that, I mean, I'll really have to drive it a long, long time to make it worthwhile from a planetary perspective. So they actually gave me, the state of California gave me $1,000 to drive the car to pick and pull and retire it. Okay, which was more, and that seems to be like a weird incentivization. I miss the car. I love the car, so I miss that part too. But anyway, I'm giving you a long answer to your question, and the short answer is just there are so many different things you could factor into deciding whether or not to buy something new versus keep something that you have in place, continuing to serve you. And I would say it's always cheaper to keep it.
Well, I was just wondering if you've heard of anyone who's trying to use old cars and make them more energy efficient, like trying to switch out their old engines and like, I guess, I don't really understand the mechanics of car yet, but I've been getting more familiar with it. If there's anyone who's been actively trying to pursue a way to use like the shells of old cars and make them energy efficient in some ways that they're being reused and recycled.
Certainly classic cars. So there are certain old cars and people are like gutting a Tesla and trying to figure out how to skin it with the shell from some old classic car. I don't know if they're doing it in general, like Chevy Novas or stuff like that, But yes, there are all sorts of people doing one-offs, but nobody's created a business of like taking Toyota Corollas or something and making them electrics en masse, from what I can tell.
That's a great question, Victoria. And a, you know, a great answer too. I've just been thinking about, you know, for the refrigeration, that was always a thing with, I think there was the Montreal Protocol to kind of, you know, there was the depletion, the ozone in the atmosphere, and they had to kind of roll back all of these refrigerators. And if you look at Project Drawdown, I think, I forget what the name of that is. It's, you know, Paul Hawken, and they did this sort of assessment of all of the ways to get emissions, you know, to sequester carbon emissions. And a lot of their top suggestions are like, you know, get all of these massive sort of really intensively energy efficient, you know, appliances or cars or refrigerator, mostly refrigerant off. And you know, it's just, you know, it seems very complicated. So we're running low on time, and, you know, I wanted to end this on a somewhat, you know, positive note. And Peter, you know, there's a lot of, you know, bleak forecasts. You know, I study, you know, petrochemical waste, and, you know, you mentioned peak oil, and, you know, the prospects now that, you know, things are moving towards electric vehicles, and sort of the prospects for petrochemicals is really to invest deeper into plastics. And we're seeing the plastics industries trying to make this massive profiteering, you know, in everything, incorporating into everything from our biotech, et cetera, to all these new gadgets. And I'm curious, this is a question about sort of your hope, your passion, despite sort of the bleak prospect. How do you stay hopeful when it looks like, you know, mass consumerism is here to stay? And is, you know, you mentioned sort of the inspiring, you know, individuals who can get switched on, but is there an inspiring memory or story you have of seeing someone who maybe didn't first claim themselves as a repair person, as a fixiter, but whose light bulb kind of flicked on, and now they get it and they're just deep in it? And I think that for me personally, like, that's something that I would love to hear your reflections on those.
Oh, I see it all the time. I mean, you want me to find a specific example of that? I mean, I tried to convey that earlier with this idea that how people light up when this thing that they basically gave up is gone forever, you know, works again. So the one that comes to mind is the first generation of Microsoft Xboxes had this problem where the graphics chip would separate and it would basically cause the thing to die prematurely. It's called the red ring of death. And we had someone bring one of those into a Fixit Clinic, and they'd done the research, and they started early, and it was 3 hours in the Fixit Clinic, and they basically tore the thing down. We figured out how to basically reflow the solder underneath this graphics chip. And they put it back together and started up, and they started crying. It was just like they couldn't believe that the thing would work again after putting that investment of time into it. You know, and there's a longer story here where Microsoft originally denied that it was a problem, and so people's Xboxes were dying. You paid $500 for this thing, and it stopped working after a while. And Microsoft was basically trying to disavow the whole thing, and they were also the company that was putting a sticker on saying, you know, if you void your warranty if you open it up. But it was the community that basically figured out over time, this is the problem, this is how to address it. So there's that one. I mean, for me, you know, you can be disheartened, but on the good days, it feels like sport. And it feels like an interesting challenge. I mean, this is what life is really all about, is how do you find interesting life-sized things to sort of bite into and figure out how big a bite you can take out of it. So yeah, when I go up to Sacramento to work on right to repair legislation, and I find out the week before that the manufacturers' lobbyists have been into all the committees members' offices, showing them why it's dangerous to give consumers the right to repair, and the law gets killed in committee. Yeah, it's disheartening, but then I start to think about, okay, how can I sneak around them by working on institutional procurement? You know, or like this issue that you know, Hayden brought up about the sort of the idea that it's abandoned property. I'm wondering, can we launder the abandoned property through Gray Bears in downtown Santa Cruz? You know, so it gets donated to Gray Bears, but then Gray Bears understands this is the cash for UCSC, and we'll just give it back to them like at the beginning of the term so they can move it into the dorms, right? So everything's, you know, everything's a photo like a funny, clever. Can you do something clever to sort of make it work? Is what I'm thinking.
I love that response of just kind of outwitting a system that is devilishly and strategically and legally protected and protecting itself to kind of keep us on this crash course. So it requires witty and community-oriented people like yourself. So we're so grateful that you would take the time, to share with us today, your expertise on this. We really hope we can continue building a relationship with Fixit. I know there's a lot of students on campus who have expressed interest who weren't able to make it today, and still the ones who are here today, are still here, which is, a testament given it's Zoom fatigue and it's almost 7:30 on a Thursday. So, this is so interesting, so cutting edge, so relevant, and it has a lot of implications for learning, for environment, for, just, material, industry. So, very grateful to have you, and very grateful for everybody who was able to join in today. We're going to leave an eval link in the chat. This is a program that was funded by the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and it was co-hosted by Sustainability Office and PoCSC, as well as so many folks from the American Indian Resource Center who we are nestled under. Please don't forget to sign up for the events tomorrow with maritime. It was Micronesian maritime traditions, traditional navigation. And so we look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for being part of this. It was really wonderful to present to you. And if you have any lingering questions, just contact me anytime. Chris knows how to reach me.
Certainly. Oh, wait, your Fixit event on Saturday.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you have time, 11 o'clock Pacific, I think it's the best show on Zoom. So for those of you, go look on our website and figure out, email me directly if you can't figure it out, but basically register for that and we'd be thrilled to have you.
I'll put the link in the chat. It's at 11 o'clock. All right, good night. Thank you so much, everybody. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care.